All right, everyone, happy Tuesday. Today is going to be our lesson 2, day 1. At this point, hopefully you figured out that our topic is Jackie Robinson, and more specifically, leaders in social change. In this case, through baseball, but we're going to think about what leaders do, what kind of qualities they have to be able to be a leader in social change. So this is day 1 of lesson 2. We're going to break it down into a couple days because there is a lot of reading with it. So it's going to be a lot of reading on my end and some work on your end. So it's just best to do it in 2 days. So what are we learning and doing today? You're going to first review your learning targets, and then we will read pages 6 to 9, and then we'll do pages 6 through 7, the gists, and then we'll pick back up tomorrow doing gists on pages 8 and 9 and finishing the rest of the lesson. So our big target is being able to, I can summarize an informational text. So being able to read a passage and then summarize it. We did actually a lot of talking about this when we were doing the test prep unit and talking about what a summary needs to have in it. And we talked about having that big idea and key details. So we'll get into that further in this unit. So let's think about main idea versus gist. So we're going to be coming up with gists as we read our passage today. So what are main ideas and how are main ideas different from the gist? So why don't you take 30 seconds to think about that? Okay, well, we know main ideas are the main points related to the real world that the author wants you to understand and take away from reading. And the gist is what the text is mostly about. So again, when you think about main idea, think about what the author wants you to understand. What are they writing that piece for? What do they want you to take away from it? The gist is really just summing up what the text is mostly about. So today we're going to, like I said, read pages 6 through 7. I will read them to you. They are on this page, but that's obviously a little hard to see. So I'm going to pull up the electronic version, which I will also make sure that you guys have a link to so that you can pull it up yourselves. We'll stop and do a gist after I've read through. And then you guys will do a few gists on your own for the work time today. So again, this is Promises to Keep by Sharon Robinson. And it said how Jackie Robinson changed America. In memory of my beloved brother, Jack Roosevelt Robinson, Jr. All right. On April 15th, 1947, my father, Jack Roosevelt Robinson, stepped out of the Brooklyn Dodgers dugout, crossed first base, and assumed his position as first baseman. He paused, hands resting on bent knees, toes pointing in, then stood, lifted his cap, and saluted the cheering fans. It was a defining moment for baseball and for America. As a result of Dad's accomplishments on and off the field, I inherited a legacy of excellence and service. Today, this legacy takes me into classrooms across the United States, Canada, and the Caribbean. As the Vice President of Educational Programming for Major League Baseball, I bring the Breaking Barriers program into schools where children, ball players, and I talk baseball, values, and books. The kids are naturally curious about my childhood. They want to know what it was like being Jackie Robinson's daughter. They ask me questions such as, did your dad come home angry after losing a baseball game? Or how did you and your family feel about the hate letters you got? But the question that makes me stop and think hardest has been, did you really know your father? When kids ask me that question, I tell them I was 6 when my dad retired from baseball, 12 when he was elected into the Hall of Fame, 22 when he died. I also tell children that my father taught me to flip pancakes, hit a baseball, question political leaders, solve problems, and keep promises. Whether I was learning to walk, wildly swing the bat at a fastball, tackling one of my brothers during a football game, or singing a show tune from West Side Story on the rock ledge of our fireplace, Dad encouraged me with his praise and loving smile. At times, my father made me feel like I was the most important person in his life. He was fond of saying, just put your fingertip in my tea and I won't need any sugar. I'd giggle and believe I actually had the power to sweeten that cup. When I was sad, Dad was there for me. The first time I cried over failed love, he sat on my bed and reminded me that I deserved better. Over the years, I've learned about my father's baseball days from friends, family, other ball players, and even strangers who are anxious to share cherished Jackie Robinson memories with me. To this day, I'm mesmerized by newsreels of my dad rounding the bases, joyously clapping his hands as he outfoxes another pitcher. My father was famous. My brothers and I grew up among awards, trophies, and photographs. But our parents taught us not to worship these honors. They said we should measure our lives by the impact we had on other people's lives. All we had to do was pay attention to the way our parents lived to know that this was true. As a kid, my favorite photograph hung on the wall leading to the lower level of our house. It showed my dad stealing home plate during the 1955 World Series. I passed it several times a day and always paused to look at how a cloud of dirt obscured half my dad's body, or to study the way his right hand was clenched into a fist. I never failed to notice how my dad's face twisted with fierce determination. Could this be the same man who never raised his voice at home? Looking back, I realized that one of the things I admire most about my father was how he stayed in the game until the end. He stood firm even when his opinion wasn't popular. Whether questioning an umpire or an American president, Dad used his celebrity to challenge an unjust system and support a movement organized to correct the wrongs. So yes, I knew my dad well as a father and as a man. This brings me to why I wrote Promises to Keep. Though my father's story has been told many times, I wanted the opportunity to tell it in its fullness. Promises to Keep is more than a photographic biography. It's a story about commitment. I've chronicled my father's life through words and pictures as a lasting memory to a man who was shaped by American history and who had an impact on American history. As you read Promises to Keep, you'll see that my father's personal and professional experiences, like baseball itself, reflected the American experience of his time. A lifetime of service was my father's commitment to America and his challenge to you. Whether you commit to study hard, to be a better friend, family member, or neighbor, I hope that through my father's example, you will understand why making a promise and keeping it is so important. You see this picture down here, my dad and me, it says. Okay, so I want you to stop and think about this first question. What is the text about? And then what is the purpose of the book? What might you expect the rest of the book to be about? So these 2 pages really set up why Sharon Robinson wrote this book. So I want you thinking about that. So what is this text about? All right, so we're going to move into reading pages 8 and 9. And then we'll talk about going back and doing some gists. So this section is called A Black and White World. My great-grandparents were slaves. My grandmother was a sharecropper. My father was born into a segregated world. Although it may be hard for you to imagine an America where black and white people were kept apart by laws and customs, that world existed. My father helped change it. By breaking the color barrier in Major League Baseball, my father helped break down racial segregation. Before we get into the story of Jackie Robinson, however, we need to understand how segregation became a way of life in the United States. The story of race relations in the United States begins more than 400 years ago, when African American men, women, and children were enslaved and forcibly brought to the American colonies. The Civil War, 1861 to 65, ended this terrible, inhumane practice. By 1870, there were approximately 4 million African Americans in the United States who, because of the 13th and 14th Amendments to the Constitution, were now U.S. citizens. As freedmen and women, some former slaves attended school for the first time, farmed in a system called sharecropping, voted, and held local, state, federal offices. But the new freedoms granted to African Americans were unacceptable to many Southern whites who were used to being in control. These Southerners used political, legal, and violent means to control blacks. They passed state laws to restrict the rights of blacks and to keep them from voting. Even the courts denied blacks opportunities and basic human rights. In Plessy versus Ferguson, the U.S. Supreme Court upheld the state's right to pass racial segregation laws. The Supreme Court's ruling said that such laws did not violate the U.S. Constitution. The nation was divided, those favoring segregation against those who opposed it. The period of legal segregation in America is commonly referred to as the Jim Crow era. In the 1830s, Thomas Rice, a famous white music hall entertainer in Baltimore, Maryland, created a fictional character based on a black singer-dancer. Rice called his character Jim Crow. White audiences laughed at the clowning and foolish antics of the character. Black people found the performances demeaning. They began to use the term Jim Crow to mean discrimination. So now if we go back, there's a picture of what slave quarters looked like, so where they lived between 1860 and 1863. At the bottom, we have the timeline. So starting in 1619, people were kidnapped from Africa and brought to the Virginia colony. 1776, so many years later, there are approximately 2 million slaves in the American colonies. After the American Revolution, approximately 55,000 free black people live in what is now the United States. 1787, the U.S. Constitution does not mention slavery, but it does ban the importation of slaves as of 1808. So no longer can slaves come to the country. In 1861 to 65, the Civil War rages between the Union, the North, and the Confederacy, the South. And this was a picture of that drawing that they referred to, talking about Jim Crow. This 19th century sheet music shows a Jim Crow figure. Notice that the song is sung by T. Thomas Rice in Ethiopian. Ethiopia is a country in Africa. Okay, then continuing the timeline. 1863, President Abraham Lincoln signs the Emancipation Proclamation, which frees slaves in the Confederate States. Then by 1865, the 13th Amendment to the Constitution makes slavery illegal everywhere in the United States. 1868, the 14th Amendment guarantees all people born in the United States, including African Americans, citizenship and equal protection under the law. Native Americans are not included. And then 1870, the 15th Amendment grants all adult male citizens the right to vote. All right. So now we've read all the way through to page 9. Again, what is the text about? So at this point, you should be realizing that we're getting not only in the first few pages the author's purpose, Sharon for writing this book, which is really to discuss the change that her father made. Now we're also getting into the history of it. So why he became who he became. So those next 2 pages really just lay out what was going on during that time period. And you'll see where that develops into Jackie Robinson's life. So now we will move into the work time for today, which is working on gist. So your sheet for today looks like this on Google Docs. So that first paragraph is actually in there for you. And then we'll talk about it now. So it says, on April 15th, 1947, my father, Jack Roosevelt Robinson, stepped out of the Brooklyn Dodgers dugout, crossed first base, and assumed his position as first baseman. He paused, hands resting on bent knees, toes pointed in, then stood, lifted his cap, and saluted the cheering fans. It was a defining moment for baseball and for America. So right now, just think, what is the gist of this paragraph? What is it mostly about? So you see the mention of Jack Robinson coming out of the dugout, taking his position, lifting his cap to the cheering fans, and that this is a defining moment. So if we were to sum this up in a gist, looking at really doing one big idea, this would be something that we could say. When Jackie Robinson first played for the Brooklyn Dodgers, it was a defining moment for baseball. Okay, so as you can see, I've already plugged that into your work for today. You see this other section here that says unfamiliar vocabulary. You can feel free to write any vocabulary as we go back through. I've already put all the paragraphs in here for you, so you really don't have to go back to the passage. You can just read them on the pages. And if you see any words that you don't know, you can go ahead and put them over in unfamiliar vocabulary. And I can help you out as I look over these, or you can also feel free to go to dictionary.com to look them up. Okay? So your work time for today is that you're going to log into the Google Doc assignment and you're going to continue reading the paragraphs for gist. And then we'll talk about them tomorrow when we get back together. Okay? So first one's done for you, like I said. The paragraph was here. Right here is where you would write the gist, any unknown vocabulary, and then the actual definitions. So then you would go down. Okay, the next section is actually page by page. So I want you to read the whole page. So this one's actually 1, 2, 3 paragraphs, I think. I want you to read all 3, come up with a gist, and then do any unknown vocabulary. Then go on to page 3, and you're going to read this whole chunk, come up with a gist, and then there's 2 more. So you're going to do that 2 more times. Okay? If you cannot see by any chance, you can go to view, or you can actually go to zoom here, and it'll make it bigger for you. And hopefully you can see it. Okay? So again, any questions that you guys have, contact me on Dojo, shoot a message out. We are on it all the time. And we will do our best to get back to you. But really all you're doing is reading the left column, coming up with a gist. Okay? So summing it up in 1 sentence, maybe 2. The big idea of that section. Okay? All right, so go ahead, finish those, turn them into me. I will do my best to get back to you guys as soon as possible with edits or comments, and then we will touch base again tomorrow.